This is the solution for the disclaimer modal exercise, which is based on a tutorial that can be found in the Tethys platform documentation. It's actually a continuation of the Add About page and disclaimer modal that's part of the Earth Engine Part 2 series of tutorials. We've just split it up in this course to make it a little more modular. Now what we'd like to do in this exercise is add a modal to the Earth Engine app. And we'd like this modal to contain disclaimer content and be available on every page of the app. Whenever you have something that needs to be available on every page, you should consider putting it in the base template so that you can avoid copying and pasting code. You want to avoid that because it makes your app more difficult to maintain if you need to update something in multiple places. So the first thing we'll do is we will open up the base template. I'll go to Templates, Earth Engine, base.html. I'll just grab that block of code and put it right above the scripts block. Now whenever you put a modal in your app, you should put it in the After App Content block. This puts it outside of the main content area and allows it to render properly. Modals from Bootstrap are made up of a series of nested divs. The outermost has a class modal, followed by modal dialog, and inside of that, modal content. In the modal content div, you have 3 divs for the header, body, and footer of the modal. We'll fill in those details later, but for now, let's add a button so that we can open the modal. And we'll go ahead and add that to the header buttons block, which we added in the previous tutorials. Now, when you create a button that opens a modal, what you need to do is add the data toggle attribute set to modal and the data target attribute set to the ID of the modal, which in this case is disclaimer modal. Notice that this is the ID of the div that has the modal class. Let's go verify that we have that. Okay, here's our disclaimer button, and when I press it, there it is. Let's go try it on another page, like the About page. Great, it appears there too. I'll go home and launch the viewer, and we'll try it here, but nothing pops up. Okay, and this is expected, because if we inspect the page using Control-Shift-C, and actually, yeah, I'll just select a random element within the content area. But remember, the modal content's actually outside of the content area. So you can see we have the plot modal here, but there's no other modals. So the reason this is, if we go and look at our viewer.html, the After App Content block is in here, but it's not doing a very important thing, which is to have the block.super directive. This will allow it to also include modals that are included from the base template. Okay, so now that we've added this, we can go back. I'll close the tools there, refresh the page, and there we go. So now our modal is appearing on all the pages. Next, let's add some filler content for our modal so that we can test it out and make sure it renders appropriately. I'll navigate back to the base.html in PyCharm and locate the body element of our modal, and I'll just replace it with the code from the tutorial. Notice that we have 5 rather long paragraphs. This is because disclaimers usually have long explanations in legal jargon, and I want to be sure that our modal can handle a lot of text. Next, let's add some footer content to our modal. In this case, we want the sponsor images to show up there, and this is essentially the same thing that we had at the bottom of our About page. We've got several images that are using placeholder.com to generate some small 50 by 50 pixel images to represent our different logos for our sponsors. Okay, let's go to the web browser and just confirm the changes. I'll refresh the page, and open the modal, and it is very verbose and long. Notice the sponsor images here at the bottom. And Bootstrap has a nice feature that in its modals, if they get too long for the page, they will scroll. Very nice. But I think what we'd like to do is have the modal be a fixed height with the ability to scroll within the modal. So let's go add some custom styles for our modal. And the first thing that we'll do is we'll open up a new file. So go to public CSS, create new file. We'll call it disclaimer modal.css. And we'll add this content from the tutorial. The one thing that I'll point out in this is that we're setting the height of the modal to 400 pixels, and we're setting overflow Y to auto. This will automatically add a scroll bar and allow you to scroll when the content is too big to fit in that 400 pixel height, but when it isn't, it'll hide the scroll bar. Okay, and that I prefer that so there's not a grayed out scroll bar when the content isn't too tall. To be able to use this though, we need to add it to our HTML, and in this case we want it to add it to the base.html since this is where the modal is defined. So I'll just add it to this content dependent styles block right after the main.css. Great. Let's go take a look in the browser and see what this looks like. So I'll refresh the page and open the modal, and there you go. That looks like a nice disclaimer modal. We have the scroll bar for our content, and the sponsor logos are looking good. Let's go test this on all the other pages to make sure it's working properly. Works on the home page and the About page.